much for that kind introduction. I do want to expand a little bit and just let you know a little bit more about myself and my values. Today, I thought I would do so by sharing something that I've written. The alternative protein trends we're here to talk about are largely driven by a desire for a more sustainable food system, something that I am absolutely passionate about and is truly what motivated me to start my company. So to help you understand my personal values, I wrote a pledge. It's a way for me to publicly commit to taking action, both as the founder of a food company and also as a consumer. I call it the Pledge of the Canadian Food Maker. It goes like this. I pledge to my family that my mission will be to practice good nutrition, to plan those meals which every day give us energy for work and play. Meals which supply the strength that wins, meals with protein, minerals, and vitamins. I pledge to the next generation, I'll do my part in conservation. Meat made with fewer resources I will consume, so that you will not face climate change doom. With all of the problems that we face, I'll do my best to outlaw waste. I want to do my bit, you see, to save the planet and nourish my family. Great, right? I'm sure that this resonates with many of you and aligns with your values. I think the rhyme scheme is even pretty good, if I do say so myself. The only problem with it, as far as I can see, is that it's stolen. See, I'm not a poet, I have to admit. I'm a plagiarist. The original is a little different. The first stanza is largely the same, but in the second, I'm pledged my service to the nation to do my part in conservation. The rules of cooking I'll observe, each bit of food I will conserve. It's the end where the difference becomes most apparent, because now the person making this pledge is not doing their bit and more. Sorry, the end is where it's different, because now I'm doing my bit and more to help America win the war. You see, this pledge wasn't written by me to inspire people to consume more alternative protein in 2022. It was written in 1940 by Howard Bigger to inspire American homemakers to conserve food and resources to support the war effort across the Atlantic. See, it was a part of a very important and complex alternative protein marketing strategy that was commissioned by Franklin Delano Roosevelt himself. You see, in November of 1940, FDR had some big food marketing problems. Now, of course, as you might know, there were lots of problems to go around in 1940. Nazi Germany's march across Europe had landed on the shores of the English Channel, and the battle for Britain was raging on. The United States at that time wasn't officially a participant in the Second World War, with Pearl Harbor still being a year away. But there was little to no doubt that the US was going to be dragged into the conflict. And now FDR, he had been elected to his third term in office just 2 months prior, landslide victory. And the most significant action that he took was to sign the first ever US peacetime draft in September of 1940. He and a cooperative Congress. The Act, the Selective Service and Training Act, took care of raising FDR's army, but making that army strong, that was a problem that could not be solved with the stroke of a pen. You see, the United States had been supporting the Allied war effort for years, and food rationing policies were already in place. Those policies had left many Americans with a protein deficit in their diet, especially amongst the portion of the population that was most likely to be called into service. Not enough protein means not enough muscle, and it was looking like the world needed every ounce of strength to defeat the Nazis. Now, as big a challenge as that was to keep Americans' bodies in fighting shape, it was as important, if not more so, to keep the American public's spirit high. At the time, the American public still endorsed a policy of isolation and didn't want to enter the war. Now, leadership knew that it was inevitable and had to be thinking how much harder that sell was to the public when grocery stores and dinner tables were light on protein. So what did FDR do? like any good politician does when facing a big challenge. He struck a committee. Actually, because FDR was not just a good politician, but a great one, he struck two committees. The first was the U.S. Committee on Food and Nutrition. Some of the best minds in the field of human biology were brought together and tasked with the responsibility of developing the ideal American diet with the food resources that were available. Protein was obviously a key focus. Amongst the experts, protein was obviously a key focus, and the consensus among the experts was to meet the nation's protein intake goal in the era of meat rationing, people would have to start eating more alternative protein. More alternative protein, great, but probably not the kind that you're thinking. They weren't recommending plant-based burgers. In the 1940s, the most abundant, high-quality protein that wasn't commonly included in the American diet was organ meat, or offal. Hearts, lungs, liver, kidneys, brains, very common cuisine in other parts of the world, but not in the United States. This was the alternative protein that was going to fill the gaps at dinner tables as roasts and steaks became more scarce and help nourish both American bodies and spirits. Perfectly elegant solution to an immense problem. All the doctors on the committee, I'm sure, patted themselves on the back and toasted to their genius. But I probably don't need to tell a room full of marketing professionals that this plan had one teeny tiny flaw to it. Consumer acceptability. So you want me to serve my family brains in order to win a war on the other side of the ocean? No, thank you. FDR and his senior staff, of course, had seen this problem coming, which is why they struck the second committee that I mentioned. The Committee on Food Habits was responsible to figure out how to actually get Americans to eat that optimal diet, including the alternative protein. They needed to find a way to convince people who had grown accustomed to roasts, steaks, and pork chops every day of the week to put some heart, liver, and tongue on the dinner table. The men on the committee did something smart as their first move and hired famed cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead to act as the executive secretary for the committee and actually do the research work that was required to find the solution. Mead and her research staff framed their work in a theory on incentives and barriers to behavioral change. We had recognized that the bulk of the work done to date was focused on creating incentives to eating differently. Appealing to a person's sense of patriotism was really common. Eat nutritious food because Uncle Sam needs us strong. Unfortunately, these messages were really largely ineffective because they didn't do anything to address why people weren't eating well in the first place. That ineffectiveness led Margaret Mead to focus recommendations on removing barriers rather than creating incentives to behavioral change when it came to food. In her research, she discovered many different barriers to consuming organ meat at the time, but I want to talk about 3 here today in order of how challenging they were to solve. Availability, lack of knowledge, and fear of change. On the issue of availability, most butcher shops didn't carry or display organ meat because consumers didn't demand it. But of course, that leads to the catch-22, where consumers don't demand products that aren't available to them. So the committee did something simple. They just went straight to the meat processors, butchers, and their associations, and asked them to start displaying organ meat. It really was as simple as that to overcome the first challenge. The second problem was a little bit trickier to solve. People didn't know how to prepare organ meat. Two very familiar strategies were employed to solve this problem. And the first was content marketing. In partnership with the meat industry, booklets like this one, Victory Meat Extenders, were produced and distributed. And they included cooking instructions and recipes for stretching out meat rations and incorporating organ meat into meals like baked liver, braised parts with stuffing, liver spoon cakes, and cream grains on toast. If you ever get a very challenging request from a stakeholder to make something popular or get something to go viral, just be sympathetic to the marketers who had the responsibility of selling cream grains on toast to the American public.
That was for lunch today?
No, I thought about talking to a hotel, but no. So the back of this booklet is actually two where that pledge of the American homemaker was first published. The second strategy was influencer marketing. It was the 1940s, and women dominated household food purchasing and preparation decisions. And Mead specifically focused on her attention on influencing women's decision-making for nearly all cultural groups. And while there were no Pinterest boards or TikTok chefs to draw inspiration from, there were ladies' clubs. Mead understood the influence that these clubs had and set out to have home economists attend meetings and lead discussions on strategies to diversify the proteins they were serving their family. The home economists were explicitly trained not to dictate to the members what they should or shouldn't do, but to instead present the challenge, open the floor to discussion, and provide members with information to help create their own strategies. In their research, they found that members were 10 times as likely to attempt an organic meat recipe at home with this method compared to when the home economists simply presented themselves as an authority figure and instructed people what to do. The final problem was the most challenging that they faced: fear of change. Tell me if this resonates with you. Worldwide crisis. No real idea or understanding when that crisis is going to end. What do you feel like eating? Something comforting, right? Restaurants that we work with tell us that comfort food like entree-sized mac and cheese went from the least to the most popular menu item over the past 2 years. And the Committee on Food Habits found the same thing in 1940. People were afraid the world around them was changing and the quality of life that they enjoyed was going to be lost forever. It was the least opportune time in human history to introduce a new unknown protein to consumers. So how did they solve this problem? With a rebrand. Mead needed to make it clear to people that they weren't being asked to give up something they loved entirely, but they were just being asked to add some variety to the type of protein they were serving. So offal was out, and it was rebranded to variety, a term that we still use to this day, but only in North America. It's not a common term in other parts of the world where organ meat was more commonly consumed. So why am I telling you this? Who shows up to a conference on plant-based meats and talks exclusively about liver, lungs, and brains? I share it with you because I think that it's really important that any analysis of the state of the plant and alternative protein industry has to be done in a historical context. We're always tempted to think that the trends and social changes that we're experiencing are really unique and special, and that's rarely true. Our paths are far more often evolutionary than they are revolutionary. When we're ignorant to history, we miss out on important opportunities to learn from past successes and failures. In 1941, the challenge before Margaret Mead was daunting: get people to eat more alternative protein to help defeat the Nazis. As incredible as it sounds, most of you will probably be asked at some point in your careers to get people to eat more alternative protein to help solve another monumental problem. The fact is that we need a more sustainable food system that can produce more protein with fewer resources. And two trends are driving this reality. The first, climate change. It's inevitably going to increase weather volatility in some of the most important food-producing regions of the world, including Canada. More weather volatility means more years like 2021, where drought in Manitoba caused dramatic declines in the production of feed crop and forages. Less feed means less meat. The second reason is a little bit more complicated because it's actually a negative consequence of a generally positive change. Household incomes are rising around the world, especially for some of the lowest income people. Development and rising incomes mean that by 2050, we should expect to have to produce upwards of twice as much meat as we do today. And we already use 80% of all agricultural land globally for meat production. If we don't figure out how to make meat more efficiently and more sustainably, we're in big trouble. Not fixing this means extra carbon emissions, making climate change worse, loss of biodiversity, water scarcity, and higher food prices across the board, which sucks for all consumers, but is a matter of life and death for the consumers who already spend, for some of the lowest income consumers who already spend upwards of 40% of their household income on basic food staples. There's no villain here to put on a propaganda poster, and it rarely gets news coverage. But this gradual increase in demand for meat, along with ongoing challenges of producing it, has the potential to cause enormous human suffering in our lifetimes. Now, to me, it doesn't actually matter whether you're asked to sell plant-based meats, plant-enhanced meat, like my company makes, more sustainably made conventional meat, or even the next generation of fermented or cultivated protein. Your challenge as marketers is probably going to be the same. Ask people to change a behavior and to value an environmental good that doesn't necessarily directly benefit them. And we know this is really hard. As Michael alluded to, sales of plant-based meats erupted when first launched as vegans and vegetarians flocked to try new products. And curious consumers bought their first plant-based burgers. Then the inevitable happened. Demand plateaued. Vegans and vegetarians only make up 7% of the market, and for the remaining 93% of consumers, it's a hard sell to convince somebody to pay a price premium for a product that may not meet all of their expectations. So how do we do it? How do we get consumers to eat meat that's more sustainable? In our market research, we discovered that more than half of consumers already wanted to take steps to reduce the environmental impact of their diet, with a specific focus on meat. The incentives to change are already there, so my company follows Margaret Lean's lead and focuses on removing barriers rather than creating incentives to change. We focus on many different barriers: taste, price, convenience, trust, but the biggest one for me by far is also the most daunting that Margaret Lean faced: consumers' fear of losing something that they love. We also call this the fear of rapid rate of change. And it's why we make what we call plant-enhanced meats under our brand name Bump. We combine ordinary meat with plant-based protein, and it helps us to overcome the fear of change by delivering a product that's more familiar, tastes better, and costs less than fully plant-based meats, but still requires fewer resources to produce than ordinary meats. So to wrap up, I want to leave you with a challenge. I think that we all know that food marketing can sometimes be problematic. When it focuses on exploits people's fears and insecurities about food, I think it makes the world's problems worse, not better. But you also have a tremendous amount of power to shape our food system in a really positive way. Margaret Mead's work helped the Allies win World War II. Your work to make more sustainable protein mainstream can be a piece of the puzzle of solving climate change and preventing food insecurity from getting worse over the next 20 years. So I want you to think about what your pledge is. My only ask is that you keep the last line safe. Thank you.
Okay, any questions from the audience? Yes.
Thank you. I thought that was fascinating, the way you did that parallel between what was going on in the 1940s to now. It's really interesting. So, and I talked about this a little bit when Michael was at, but this whole dichotomy between you have meat or you have alternative protein. So I'm just wondering how, because I know you do trade shows and you do a lot with consumers, how are you finding they're reacting to having this blend? So it's not either or.
So a big part of the reason why I started my company and why I took this approach is that I saw that there was a gap in the marketplace, that there weren't other companies at the time doing products that combine conventional protein with plant-based alternative protein. And I think that's a big part of that is the state of the food system right now and consumers' relationship to their foods. What we see really across human behavior is that if people don't have a good understanding of something, they just, to sort of get their place in the world aligned, they just want that thing broken down into a binary, good and bad. And so I think that the challenge that we have right now is that many people are disconnected from their food. Many people are anxious about their food. And so what's happening is we're getting this dichotomy where people are just saying, okay, we're going to market our product as being good and pure because it is absent of these things. When in the reality, from either a nutritional or environmental standpoint, it's not black and white in that way at all. So our approach to marketing has always been head first, heart second, is that we focus on education, we focus on teaching people as much as we can, and engaging them. And it's really hard. I'll tell you, when you get our marketing team says that you get 0.5 seconds to capture somebody's attention when you're speaking to them, or your packaging is on the grocery store shelf. It's hard to fit an education message into a half second. So we've had to be really clever and work really hard on our marketing, on that consumer engagement, on that consumer education piece, because we know that there's no way that we can follow that conventional dichotomy, binary, and sort of sell our product that way.
James, what is success for your company?
What is success like? What does future success look like for my company?
Define success for Juno.
I've always been really passionate about solving this problem. I think that one of the things that one of our advisors, a potential investor, talked to us. At first, it was talking about what are your barriers to entry? What are your competitive advantages? What are the things that are going to prevent one of the big companies from entering this space and being taking your market share? And to me, really, that wasn't, from a business standpoint, you don't necessarily want that, but if a big company enters this space and is successful at educating consumers and following that path of breaking down that binary and helping people to understand the power of incremental change. So that's the goal for us, is to make that mainstream. And I know that isn't just by capturing people's attention in a very short period of time, that's going to be a long, drawn-out process. So I think for us, we've got a vision and goals sort of that are very short-term and very long-term as well. Very short-term, we're a startup, getting in the next month, in the next quarter, in the next payroll is always the key focus for you. And seeing consistent growth in our consumers and consistent growth amongst repeat consumers. Those are the people that I'm focused on right now. I would say that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that we made early on. We tried to appeal to everyone. And we learned very quickly that you can't tailor marketing messages to everyone. We need to focus on finding that core consumer base that is really going to be passionate about us and love us, and be sort of our influencer marketers moving forward. So we're very much focused on building out that core consumer base at this point as our short-term goal. And then at long-term goal, I've always said that our company mission statement is to solve some of the world's biggest food problems, one small meat shop at a time. We do very much want to follow a production and distribution model that's a little bit different from the conventional retail strategy, but we do want to have a global footprint. It's something that I've always been ambitious to. We don't want to stay just local to Manitoba or local to Canada. We want to have a global impact because this is a global problem, so that's our goal, is to be a global brand.
Thanks, that was great. I really appreciate the kind of historical context. I think we often are caught up in our own moment and think that everything is new. I was wondering if we were sort of talking about this a little bit earlier, but this sort of tension between kind of more the utopian and apocalyptic when it comes to marketing. On the one hand, we have a climate emergency, and we have a whole portion of the population that is really wanting to respond to that, right? So I think they might respond a little bit better to the kind of messaging that, this is a way to help solve and avert a catastrophe in the same way that, during World War II, it was, the Nazis that we were fighting. But you've also sort of, I think, you're talking a little bit more about kind of a utopian view here, which, like, literally in this case, you can have your week and you get to. right? So like this idea that like it's not either or. Do you have a sense in terms of maybe, the approach that you've taken, marketing messaging, A/B testing, whatever, like what lands better? What does it depend on the demographic? Like what do you think is the kind of key to some of these things? Because like some of the beyond products were fairly apocalyptic, right? But their approach to marketing was, let's make this as similar as possible, right? So let's make it so that they don't miss it. So they're kind of, I would say their product strategy was more kind of utopian in that way.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I think that it does in parts depend a little bit on the demographic that you're speaking to. We, again, in our efforts, we really focused on what our core consumer base is right now. We're very much focused on families, millennial families, young kids. We do our product development and our marketing tailored towards those consumers as opposed to trying to be really broad and appealing to everyone. And so I think in our efforts, like I said, we found that people that, again, were in that core group, they didn't need to be sold on the idea that like this was a tool and a step that they could take to help solve climate change. When we were working at conferences, trade shows, farmers markets, or just even having dialogue with customers online, like there were people that would come up and just be like, I don't get this. I don't understand, like why, this is outrageous, like people got upset. And then other people walked up to us and were like, oh my goodness, this is it. I get this 100% right now. And so for us, we sort of learned like, again, like those apocalyptic messages, like, yeah, that creates an incentive to behavioral change. But what we found is just like Margaret Mead, the people that are our core consumer group don't need an incentive. They know, they've done the research themselves. They don't need me to convince them of that. My job is to remove as many barriers as possible for them to actually take action on the incentives that they've created and sort of internalize themselves. And for us, when we look at families, the issue is always that it's one purchaser in food preparer making decisions on behalf of the entire family, right? You've got somebody who's making a food purchasing decision, cares about the environmental impact of their diet, especially their meat consumption. But it's pretty unlikely that every single member of that household is fully on board, and they don't want to cook 2 meals. So for us, it's that opportunity to produce something that really nails it in terms of the taste, texture, and consumption experience, but also doesn't necessarily offend sensibilities of somebody that's just that's not interested in that, right? So that's really where our sweet spot is right now, and we're really trying to focus on building those groups by providing them, sort of, again, that barrier-free product that helps them to achieve the things that they already want to do.
I think you almost answered my question. I was thinking along the lines of the marketing funnel and the change you're trying to make happen and where your company will be focusing. So from what I'm understanding, you're very closer to the end of the funnel where people are willing, they just have a bunch of things that need to be solved for them until they actually become applicants.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely where we're positioning right now. And again, I would say that this is a dramatic departure from where we started the company. I started the company thinking, well, we're going to appeal to everybody, right? Like this product tastes so good, we're price competitive, everybody is going to be jumping on board with this. And we learned very quickly that no business can start by trying to appeal to everyone. You have to have a core group of consumers that's passionate about you because it's just impossible to scale effectively and to learn the marketing and product development lessons that you need to at a really large scale. So it's definitely been a departure for us, but it's been a successful pivot in terms of where our marketing approach has been.
Thanks for the presentation. At this table, we were talking about CCFI's research and how climate change is third on the list, and so is the rising cost of food. So it's interesting to see this product. So my question is, where does this fall in terms of price? And why 70-30? Why the 70-30 split that I think I saw in the image?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. So we have always attempted to be sort of within 130% of what a conventional product is, right? It's almost impossible to launch any new product into a marketplace and be really, really competitive with commodity unbranded product, right? And so if you want the long list of like the mistakes that I made along the way, starting with a raw ground product that is competing with commodity products that are unbranded, processed in stores, often loss leaders, not the right decision. But we did that because, and this is also the reason why we started at the 70-30 blend, because we felt that it was the most flexible product, and we felt that it gave people the opportunity to just try it for the first time, see how well it worked in the recipes that they were making at home. The problem with that approach in doing the ground product in that way is that we really didn't realize that it was a small price premium, but the effort premium was very high because you had to take that product home, you had to invest time and energy making it into something, the cost associated with that, the time associated with that, and then the emotional energy associated with potentially disappointing your family if it didn't pan out in the way that you expected. So we realized very early that we needed to change the strategy a little bit and diversify the product offerings that we have. So we didn't stick to 70-30. The only product that we have at that ratio is a raw ground beef. Our burger patties are at 60%. When we say our burger patties are at half of the protein comes from animal sources and half of the protein comes from plant-based sources. We've got a sausage that's at a higher ratio. And a lot of that is driven by like product development and the food science side of things. It is super, super easy because that's diminishing our research team, but it is very, very easy to make a blended sausage because sausage inherently has lots of spices, lots of fats, lots of sodium. You can't get away from making sausage without those three things. And those three things help you bring in that additional plant-based protein so much. So it's relatively easy for us to make an absolutely outstanding sausage with a great bun, great texture, great moisture and fat retention, but at a really high plant-based protein ratio. Ground product, no additional seasonings, no additional sodium added, 3 ingredients, beef, water, texturized plant protein. Like, you try and increase that plant protein and your consumer experience is just gonna crash through the floor. So we made it very, very intentional to try and tailor the inclusion ratio of plant-based protein to the product itself. And some of that we did with consumers' sort of feedback. One of the most interesting projects that we did during the pandemic, I think it was January of 2021, we were all hunkered down, it was a fairly cold winter, and we were all hunkered down in lockdown again. And we were doing some of our first taste tests with Prairie Research Kitchen at Red River College. We were doing those taste tests literally because the college was closed to all visitors. I was in my car on Main Street, -3 degrees outside, like, eating little burger samples. And what we decided was because we couldn't host consumer feedback groups, we couldn't do feedback panels. So forget it, we still have to get consumer feedback. So we did a 3-month subscription program where we sent out different boxes with different product samples to consumers and asked them to prepare them at home, send us feedback, and one of the variables of one of the boxes was inclusion ratio, and trying to get what is that ideal ratio for consumers where they're really going to still love the product, but it's going to meet their environmental expectations as that type of business.
Hi, that was great, thank you. Jeff had a slide earlier that showed the cost of protein coming from meat was almost half of what the plant-based protein cost was. I'm just wondering, when you talk about half of your protein coming from plant-based, half of it coming from animal-based, what does it look like in your hands? Like, is the one like twice as much? I'm just wondering what that relationship was, because the slide showed cost per pound, but like probably cost per gram of protein is more.
Yeah.
So how does it kind of pile up similar? Or is it?
So you're just talking about like what our cost of goods are in each.
Oh, no, I meant like literally when you say 50% of the protein in a burger comes from meat and 50% comes from plant-based. If you looked at the materials on a cutting board, is it kind of equal, or is the plant-based way more dense in terms of
So it's by weight, by grams. That's the way that we do our blocks, whether it's sausage or burger.
And like I just mean in terms of volume, if you looked at that.
Yeah, so plant-based protein, the plant-based proteins that we're using, like it really is an amazing product. Like we use a fairly large granule texturized pea protein. It's got really great water retention capacity to it, so it absorbs nearly identical the amount of moisture that your conventional animal protein is holding on to. So that's why we say it's about half and half on the protein side of things. So yeah, by volume, the way that we typically do production is that we bring in trim from a local processor, grind it down on a coarse grind, and then we hydrate our plant-based protein, mix it together until it looks fairly uniform. Add in additional fats. If it's sausage, we obviously add in seasoning as well. So it really does an amazing job. We've always been really impressed with the work that those companies, the ingredient companies that we work with, are doing. Because at the end of the day, it not only looks like meat, but it really does taste like meat as well, because they have the flavor profile of the plant-based protein, so neutral at this point.
Awesome. Okay. Well,